I at times have had a really clear vision 4 or 5 years down the road. I didn't always end up exactly where I thought I was going to, but the process of having a goal, working towards it, making steps towards it, it got me somewhere.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of It Takes Grit. I am so excited to have Monica Rangel with me here today. Girl, what's up? How you feeling?
So glad to be here. Good to see you.
Yes, and you are a nutritionist and chef, which is amazing. And I am terrible at cooking, so I'm going to be picking your brain about everything.
Well, I've always enjoyed cooking, but the reason I have my chef's training is because when I decided to go back to school and study nutrition, because this is a second career for me, I missed the application deadline for graduate school. And so I had to wait for the next program to start. And I thought, well, my motor is revving. I'm ready to take action. So instead, I registered for cooking school. I loved it. It was so much fun.
Oh my goodness, it was kind of like a random thing extra that you got to do.
Right. Well, I knew that it would be super helpful, but I was sort of forced into it because I was like, okay, I'm ready to go. I can't start my, biochemistry and physiology till next September, but this year is not going to go to waste. So, and it was great training actually for working in nutrition to really start from the food, right? And not from the biochemistry and the physiology.
Well, that's great. And I think it ties in perfectly. And so for those of you who are listening, I am so excited because you are going to love this episode. We're going to talk about what foods make you happy, how you should control your cravings, why it's so important to eat healthy. And we've just got an expert on the show today. So you guys need to listen up and listen in. But first of all, Monica, I want to go back to what was it that got you inspired, or what was it that led you to this path of being a nutritionist? What's your background? What's your story?
Well, nutrition is actually a second career for me, and my first career was completely unrelated. First time around, went to school and studied music, and I was a professional opera singer for 10 years after I finished school, but eventually I realized I wasn't going to do that for my whole life, and I started working in publishing, and I was doing a lot of work in health, and I was doing a lot of writing about health and nutrition, and I sort of became aware that there's a lot of people doing a lot of writing, sharing a lot of information that don't actually have solid training in the science of nutrition. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be one of those people. I want to be able to speak from a position of authority. I want to know my stuff. I don't want to be a self-taught nutrition guru. And so I decided to go back to school, got a master's degree in nutrition, really got that scientific grounding so that I could feel like I was putting good information out into the world. I'm sure there's a lot of suspect, questionable information circulating around food and nutrition. And I just wanted to be, one of the ones that was disseminating information that was really reliable.
Wow, that's so important too. So you basically got inspiration from helping other people get their, ideas out. Yeah. I love that. And so what's your own personal feelings with nutrition? Have you ever struggled with eating or anything in the past? What's your love? Why do you love helping people with nutrition?
Well, that's interesting. I like most of us, once I was an adult and making my own decisions, I had to figure out how I was going to kind of regulate myself. It feels like, okay, I get to, I'm in charge of me. I can do whatever I want. And sometimes that extra freedom can lead us in directions that we don't like the result. So just like anybody, as a young adult, I had to kind of figure out, where are my boundaries? Where are the guardrails? How do I keep myself, in a healthy body, and kind of figured that out. But I guess you asked what led me to want to help other people around nutrition. I think first I had this idea that in order to eat healthy, people needed to know more about nutrition. And the longer I did it, the more I realized that for most people who struggle with their eating, struggle with their nutrition, struggle with their bodies, a lack of information about nutrition is not the problem. They know lots and lots about nutrition. They know often, or they think they know what they should be eating, how they should be eating. And so my career has really evolved even further past nutrition And I've gotten really, really interested in what drives behavior change. How do people create sustainable change in their life? And that's what brought the two of us together, because we're both kind of on that beat together. And how, beyond just knowing what to do to be healthy, how do we then take action based on what we know? How do we take action consistently enough to get the results, so that it's not just this constant cycle of, doing what we think we should and then feeling deprived, and then doing what we want and feeling guilty, and around that cycle. So where I've landed now is trying to convert that information or that advice about healthy diet and nutrition into techniques and strategies that people can use that really touch on, but why do I do the things that I do? Why do I make those choices? How do I align my choices with my goals? Because that's where I think people really struggle.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to tap into that more, because it's like, where you are and where you want to go, but it's bridging that gap in the middle. So if somebody has got cravings, or if they've got a goal that they want, and say they've got a craving for something, what's your philosophy to say, like, hey, don't give in to those cravings. Hey, have it sometimes. But if you have a goal in mind, how do you manage those expectations?
I think, and I know you're going to agree with this because I've heard you say the exact same thing. I think it starts with awareness. When we have those cravings, I think you have to back up and get a little insight as to where's this coming from? What's triggering this? Is this just a circumstance that I typically do this, and so every time I'm in that circumstance, I just automatically have that craving? It's like Pavlov rings the bell and I start to drool. Or is this craving brought on by an uncomfortable feeling that I want to avoid, or a thought that's making me really uncomfortable? And is that so I think before we can even decide how we're going to respond to a craving and whether we're going to respond to a craving, it really pays off to think a little bit about, like, where's this coming from? What's really going on here?
That's so smart too. And just being aware of that craving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you have a certain food that, like, you will go to when you're feeling a certain way?
I have foods that I feel like I'm not safe to keep them in the house, because I do, I love them, I really enjoy them, and they're not like really high-end cravings, like there's some foods that are kind of junky, but I just love them, and so and I know if they're around, I'm going to be thinking about them. I'm going to be thinking, like, oh, wouldn't a handful of that be good right now? And so one of the ways I deal with that is, like, that stuff I don't bring into my house, or not very regularly, and certainly not in large quantities. I may enjoy it every once in a while, but it's certainly, I'm not going to put myself in that situation of having to resist that temptation every night at 9 p.m. I'm going to resist that temptation once in the grocery store and leave that on the shelf, and then not have to have that fight with myself every night. So I think, we can do ourselves a favor by controlling our environment a little bit. And it's not to have a 100%, a zero tolerance rule, but those are the kinds of things that I'm just not going to keep at arm's length. I know how that's going to go. I've been there.
Oh yeah, I can't agree more. Like, if I'm buying chocolate, is my downfall. Chocolate, anything with chocolate on, anything that's covered in chocolate by itself, anything. I mean, I'm British, so we love Cadbury's chocolate. But yeah, if it's in my house, I will demolish it, and I will eat it all in one day. There is no going back. There was a whole thing of Girl Scout cookies that were in my fridge, and I didn't even know that they were there until I found them. And it took me like 3 days to go through a whole thing. Nobody else had one. So I just don't buy it. So it's just not there. All right. I love those answers. Thank you so much. So why is it so important for us to eat healthy? I feel like some people, they're like, oh, I don't know if they really understand the repercussions of feeding your body junk food or bad food every day. And if we really could see what's going on in somebody's body when they're fueling themselves this, bad food that's toxic, that is, giving them heart disease, maybe people would be more cautious. But why is it so important for us to eat healthy now and not be like, oh, well, it's fine. I'm in my 20s, or I'm in my 30s, or I'm in my 40s, or I'm in my 50s. Like, I'm not 90 yet. Why is it important to do it now?
Well, I can tell you from experience that once you're in your 40s and your 50s, those consequences don't seem nearly as far away as they do when you're in your 20s or your 30s. But, I think there's a lot of different reasons. but it is hard when the consequences feel like they're so far down the road. When we're younger, we can get away with a lot. And, it's asking a lot to be like, well, it doesn't seem to be having any negative consequences, but they tell me that, that down the road, this isn't going to be good for me. But I think that there are some closer term consequences. A lot of people are motivated to get healthy because they don't actually like the way their bodies look. And that's fine to have that as a motivation. We want to feel good in our bodies. We want to feel good about the way we look. And that's a perfectly valid motivation. Maybe sometimes that bridges the gap until you are a little bit further down the road and start thinking like, yeah, but also I am invested in having, energy not slowing down as I age, being healthy as I age. But I think another reason that it makes sense to pay attention to this early in life, even if you feel like you're getting away with it, is that you are creating habits that can last a lifetime. And it, habits are hard to break, and you really want to be cultivating healthy habits that are going to carry you so that you don't have a lot of work to do down the road, undoing 10 or 20 years of poor eating habits once you stop getting away with it. So just, having those healthy habits in place and having the energy and I think it's up to each person to decide what their motivation is. Some people just feel like, I want my skin to look gorgeous. I want to look great in my jeans. Some people, it's all about, I want to be competitive in this race that I'm running. I want to finish in the top 10%. For some people, it's like, everybody in my family dies at 50 of a heart attack. That's not going to be me. And what's important is for you to realize, what does motivate you? What is your goal? What are the things that drive you? It doesn't help me to tell you what should motivate you. I feel like we each need to find our own motivations, because we're never going to do things because somebody else thinks it's a good idea.
Yeah, it has to come from you. And that's why we talk about all the time, like, what's your why? And if
Yes.
your why, if you're not doing anything, you say, oh, my why is my kids. I want to get healthy because of my kids. And you're still not doing it. Girlfriend, it is not your why. It is something else. Because if it was really your why, you would be doing it. I think it's funny when we talk about, things catching up with us. Remember in your 20s where you could drink alcohol and you felt fine the next day?
Yes.
That is a great sign. Remember, like, as you get into like late 20s, early 30s, like, it takes you days to recover. Just think about the same thing with food, as you get older. So I kind of compare that because, I don't drink half as much as I used to in my teens or in my early 20s, because it literally takes me like a week to get over it. And I don't have the time anymore. I'm too busy. Too busy to dealing with a hangover. Oh, that's awesome. I actually wanted to go back to something that you were speaking about earlier, because I think right now there's a lot of people who are having to pivot in their careers, pivot in something new. Maybe they've been forced to pivot because of what's been happening. Talk us through like how you made a change from being in the same industry for 10 years, I believe that you said, to something else. Was it scary? What were your first steps? Like, how did you change from one industry to something completely different that doesn't really line at all?
Gradually, it wasn't a hard stop for me. In fact, I still sing professionally. So it was a sort of a gradual tapering of one as my primary profession, as I ramped up the other from a sort of a side hustle to become a bigger profession. And like any huge change like that, it happens one step at a time. And I can't say, honestly, that I knew exactly where I was headed or where I was going to end up. I mean, some people have a crystal clear vision of what they are going to create for themselves 10 years from now, 20 years, where they're going to be. I at times have had a really clear vision 4 or 5 years down the road. I didn't always end up exactly where I thought I was going to, but the process of having a goal, working towards it, making steps towards it, it got me somewhere. And often, I end up someplace that I'd rather be, but couldn't have chosen from the beginning because I just didn't even know to want it. So, it's always just about getting started and not being overwhelmed by the size of the goal or the distance between you and your goal. One of the mottos that we live by in our program is, it doesn't really matter how far you are from your destination as long as you're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. This is perfect, because a lot of people right now, especially who are in my audience, might have a side hustle. They might have something going on, and you literally built something on the side while do something full time. And you just start, right? A lot of people say, but how? Where do I start? What do I do? Like, you just do something, right? I mean, how did you learn how to do the things on the side? What were you Googling? Were you YouTubing? Like, how did you do it?
Well, I was working, I had a part-time job that grew into a full-time job. So I was getting some on-the-job training. But I've heard you say, Rebecca, that action creates motivation and not the other way around. And I would just add like a second law, and that is that action creates clarity. And sometimes if we feel stuck because we don't know what to do next, the best way to find out is not just to continue wonder whether, which step is the right step, but just to take a step and see what happens. We can learn so much by setting ourselves in motion, and being frozen because we're not 100% certain what the outcome of a step will be or an action will be is a good way for nothing ever to happen. And just taking that step is a great way to figure out how to do it. I mean, sometimes you figure out, okay, that's not how you do it. that didn't work, but now I've narrowed the list of possibilities, and you're always learning with every misstep or every failure or every funny little blooper reel. You've learned something that you can put into place. But I think our perfectionism sometimes gets in the way. We don't want to do anything that's not going to be perfect or successful, and so we choose to do nothing at all.
Because that's the safest option sometimes, we feel. Right.
Yeah.
It's so true. And so do you feel like you were an entrepreneur at heart? Was this something that you were always destined to be? Is it something that you grew into?
I definitely grew into it, Rebecca, because I remember saying the words, I am not an entrepreneur at heart, about 10 years ago when I started to tiptoe in to being an entrepreneur. And at that point, I was self-employed, but I was a freelancer, which is very different. I didn't really understand the difference between being a freelancer, which is working for other people's businesses when they decide they want you to. Even though it was my full-time income, I wasn't really calling those shots. And the difference between that and being an entrepreneur where you have a business that employs you, that's a completely different ball of wax. So as I was starting to make some tentative steps in that direction, to actually starting a business that I was running instead of just fulfilling contracts for other people's businesses. As soon as I hit some little hurdles or some little ooh, that's confusing, that's unfamiliar, that seems scary, I remember thinking, I am not an entrepreneur. It's hard. I just don't have the stomach for this. But obviously something kept tugging me in that direction because I kept coming back to it. And then about 5 years ago, made a much more substantial kind of leap into that life. And now I love it. Now I love the freedom of it. I love the challenge of it. I love all of the things that have to be figured out and what's possible. And it's very exciting. It's a very exciting thing. But I think I definitely grew into it because my first look at what it takes to be an entrepreneur scared me to death and just sent me running right back into my safe little freelancing hidey hole where somebody else made the decisions and I just delivered, whatever they wanted. So, with responsibility comes reward.
That's so great, because I think a lot of people out there are going, well, I'd love to have something on the side. I'd love to build something, but I'm just not an entrepreneur. But, there's always, if you have a dream and you feel like there's something out there that you want to deliver, you don't have to know everything right at the beginning. You just have to want to add value. And I think really most entrepreneurs, what they're doing is everybody is adding value. Whatever type of product that they have, it's to make your life better, really, at the end of the day. So if you just want to serve people, even I think if you want to serve and you want to help other people, I believe that you're called an entrepreneur, because if you deliver that message or you deliver that product that's going to change other people's lives, then you are an entrepreneur at heart.
Sure. And the best way to learn what you do have to offer and what you could provide people that would help them is to start serving them and start listening to them and start asking them, if you, because they'll tell you what they need. And so again, that's another way we can kind of stay frozen is to sit at home and wonder, what do people want? It's like, oh, there's such an easy way to ask that or answer that question. Just ask them what they want, ask them what they need.
Absolutely. And so I think when you're starting off a journey like this, it's trying to get organized. I want to kind of go back to the food, but trying to get organized, trying to stay together. How important for you as a busy entrepreneur running around doing multiple things is feeding your body the right nutrition, has to be a priority? Like if you don't feed, like I feel like sometimes we forget to eat because we're so busy or we're not eating the right things and we grab the last thing. But why is that actually detrimental to us being, you know, our full selves and serving our full potential?
Well, so, sure, I don't have to sell you or any of your audience on the importance of nutrition and building a strong body and building a clear mind and sleeping well and having the energy that we need to do whatever it is that we've decided to put our passion into, whether it's building a business or raising a family or, you know, working in a corporation, whatever it is. So I think people know that this is something that they want that benefit. They want those results. And then it's just about, yeah, but why is it that I then fail to do it? You know, what's getting in the way from me executing on that conviction? And, you know, a lot of it comes down to behavior modification, why we do the things we do. How do we develop the habits that we develop? Are they the ones that we would have chosen? And if they're not, you know, we're not stuck with them. We have some options. And one of the kind of keystones for me in terms of helping people develop healthier habits is that we're always going to make better choices for our future selves than we're going to make in the moment. And so the more decisions we can make ahead of time without being, you know, without eliminating spontaneity and flexibility, I think there's always room for that. But for the most part, the more decisions we can make ahead of time, the better those decisions will serve us. So having, you know, a plan in place, for me, it's sort of a template. I've figured out kind of what works. I don't plan out every meal for the entire week, but I know what kind of breakfast. It's like having a wardrobe template. You know, I figured out that I look good in skinny pants and a little tunic with a little bright thing around my face. That's not really my style, but, you know, and people have a formula like this works for me. This makes my body look good. I feel confident. It's appropriate for my profession, whatever. It's like having that sort of a template for your meals. You know, if I eat breakfast that involves vegetables, you know, I then end up eating more vegetables all day than if I sit down to a bowl of cereal or some toast or a bagel. So you figure out that template. If I build my evening meal around some sort of protein, and then I always ask, well, what 2 or 3 vegetables I'm going to have with that, then somehow I don't need as much bread and potato and pasta and all of that. So you figure out those templates, and then you rinse and repeat. It's not about having a 28-day meal plan where you have, you know, what's 28 times 3? I don't know, slightly under 90, right? 90 unique breakfast, lunches, and dinners for an entire month. I mean, how many different breakfasts do you have, Rebecca? One, you eat the same thing every day.
Same thing, sometimes different flavors, but like my snacks are always pretty much the same. I have like a list of 5 or 6 snacks.
Right.
And very, very similar stuff every day. But I don't get bored because I don't get bored of feeling the way I feel.
Well, right. And if you have a template, you can mix it out. If you figured out that like nuts are a good snack, there's 15 different kinds of nuts that you can have. But I think people make it way too complicated. You know, they think they need to follow some very specific, elaborately precise combination of foods. It's like, nah, that kind of formula that you just kind of plug and play, mix and match, once you figure out what it is, you're good to go. And then it doesn't really have to take that much time and that much effort. And I think you just put your finger on it. You know, once you start to get in a groove and you're feeling good, it becomes a reinforcing cycle. You know, you want to eat that way because you like the way it makes you feel and you like what it makes possible in your life. And then you're not fighting with yourself every day.
Absolutely. I like simplicity. I mean, I grew up in England. We'd have cereal for breakfast. Like,
right,
how
same.
did that become a thing? Like, why do we have cereal for breakfast? What is even in cereal? Like, right. Especially some kids' cereal, it's like terrible. I just saw Jesse Itzler actually post something about the new Kellogg's waffles that for kids, and they're just full of like complete shit. Excuse my language.
It's a disaster,
disaster. And you're like, no wonder so many Americans are overweight. But why cereal? How did that become a thing? Please give me the answer for this, Monica.
There are a few reasons for that, but one of them was a guy whose last name was Kellogg. You might remember him, and he had a whole theory about grains and fiber, and he sort of started the cereal revolution as a health kick. Of course, he did not envision Frosted Flakes and Lucky Charms and that. He was talking about shredded wheat and that sort of thing. But he kind of got America anyway going on that whole cereal kick that became a huge, huge industry. We also have, we grow a lot of grain and somebody's got to eat it. And so it became really central to our dietary guidelines and pyramid and everything, because here in the United States, the people who create the dietary guidelines are also in charge of keeping the farmers in business. So they've kind of got a double mandate. They're like, we got a lot of dairy farmers. We got a lot of people growing grains. We better make sure that those foods are highlighted in our dietary guidelines. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons that we ended up all thinking of breakfast as being this kind of carbohydrate meal: bowl of cereal, milk, plus toast, or the bagel or the pastries or whatever. And it took me so long to realize that breakfast can look any way I want it to, and that there's nothing weird or disgusting about heating up like a little leftover salmon and some vegetables and having that for breakfast, or having a salad for breakfast, or, that just seems unthinkable once you break through that little mind illusion that you can only eat sweet things for breakfast, or you have to start your day with your stomach just couldn't handle something with flavor in it there's no going back. There's no going back.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Wow, what great marketing. What great marketing for someone to create cereal as our breakfast for all over the world.
That's right. That's right.
It's fascinating, but I think we really are breaking through and getting people. I mean, there's no protein whatsoever in cereal. And there's no protein, and that's what keeps you feeling full. So you're going to feel a crash afterwards.
Exactly. And it just sets your whole day on that kind of downward slope. And you're right. Most of that kind of typical continental breakfast or American breakfast, very low in protein. No wonder we're all hungry at 10 o'clock when the pastry cart conveniently comes around, and it just kind of snowballs from there. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate your time and your efforts and all of everything that you've had to offer us today. Like the science behind it is just amazing. So thank you so much. What is next for you? Like, what's the rest of 2020? What's 2021 got in store? Like, where are you going next?
Well, we are now in the 12th year of production for the Nutrition Diva podcast. We're getting ready to put out our 600th episode. I can't believe that. But as excited and as proud as I am of that kind of long body of work, I'm equally excited about a brand new project that I just started a few months ago, and you were one of our first guests. So my collaborator, Brock Armstrong, and I launched a new podcast called Change Academy, where, Brock is a fitness professional, I'm a nutrition professional, but we both had this thing about, it's all about behavior modification. It's all about habit formation. That's where the rubber meets the road. And we do so much of that work in our coaching, not telling people what to eat or what exercise to do, but how to change their habits, how to change their mindset, how to create the environment that they need, the lifestyle that they need. So eventually we launched a podcast. It's called Change Academy, and we're having a great time with that, really getting to explore this aspect of human behavior, which is just so fascinating and so gratifying. I mean, this is really what you do. This is why we asked you to be our first guest on the Change Academy podcast, because helping people change their lives, helping people realize their dreams, helping people put their goals, make their goals into reality is so exciting, is so gratifying. And to be able to give people tools that help them do that, that's kind of what gets me up in the morning, not so I can tell people how many grams of vitamin C is in an orange,
It gets a bit old sometimes.
It really does. That's a Googleable question.
Right. Oh, I love it. And I'm so honored that I was your first guest on your new podcast. That was amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to put all of Monica's details below, all of her podcasts, where you can find her on social media. And again, thank you so much for joining me.
It has been my complete pleasure. Can't wait to meet you sometime in real life.
Yeah, when all this is over, we'll be having a big party with everybody. Well, thank you so much.
Can't wait.
so much for listening to this podcast, guys. Make sure that you go and give Monica a follow. You can leave us a 5-star review on your Spotify or iTunes. And of course, tag your photos in It Takes Grit podcast on Instagram. Guys, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Who is that person that you want to be with? Like, what kind of traits do they have? What do they look like? Like, what are you attracted to? You know, how are they as a person?